Hello, friends, and welcome to Unseen But Believed, the podcast, where we talk about all things invisible illness. I'm your host, Anna Constantopoulos, and I've been chronically ill for over 8 years. I'm really excited for this episode because it's our first episode for EDS Awareness Month. If you weren't aware, it happens every May, and it's in order to raise awareness of EDS, or Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Now, I'm particularly excited about this because Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome was the first invisible illness I was diagnosed with. And yes, I said first. So it's really what started my entire health journey. It's why I initially got sick when I was 15 years old. It's why I'm so passionate about Unseen But Believed, is because it took me over 3 years to get diagnosed with EDS, even though I had symptoms that entire time. So I'm very passionate about EDS Awareness Month, and I'm really excited. We're going to have a ton of amazing guests this entire month, people who have been successful in their fields, who have dealt with EDS their entire lives, or maybe their symptoms didn't show up until later, but they've all learned how to manage it wonderfully. We even have somebody who's in the process of getting diagnosed with EDS, so we'll be able to talk about that more in depth. So today specifically, we're just going to be talking a little bit about what EDS is. So that way you have a good working knowledge of it for when we have, guests talking about their experience. EDS, obviously Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, is a genetic connective tissue disorder. So a fancy way of saying that your body doesn't work right. But mainly it affects your joints, your skin, and the walls of your blood vessels. What that translates to is having a lot of different issues throughout your entire body, because it's not just a specific joint pain or heart problems or something like that, or it can affect every part of your body. So it's going to look a little bit different for everyone. So there's actually 13 different types of EDS. They're listed on the EDS Society webpage if you're curious to read more about those. Disease is named after 2 doctors, which I think is really unfortunate because I would love to have a diagnosis where it was like joint instability syndrome. That would be a lot easier to explain to people than saying Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. But that's what we're stuck with, and that's why we call it EDS. So there are a lot of different symptoms of EDS, and it varies from person to person, but some of the most common ones are things related to joints. So a lot of joint pain. People will have joint instability, so there's a lot of subluxations or dislocations. Subluxations are kind of like mini dislocations. That's mainly what I deal with. I've never had a full dislocation, but some people will literally roll over in their sleep and dislocate their shoulder because their joints are just that loose. So it can be very serious and it can be very risky. If somebody's just walking and their hip dislocates, that can be really dangerous. So that's one of the major risk factors with EDS. But there's also a lot of random symptoms along with it too. So a lot of people have stomach issues, headaches, fatigue. Easy bruising is a telltale sign. So I cannot remember a point in my life where I did not have a bruise on me. I don't play sports or anything anymore, so I do not know where they come from. Actually, the other day I ran into the coffee table. So that's probably what that one was. But other than that, just random bruises show up all the time. We're weirdly flexible, so I can do very weird things with my hands, or I can turn my leg around completely backwards. My doctor has told me not to do that anymore, but it is a great party trick, so maybe I'll do it at some point. Delayed healing is a big one. So if you ever get a scar on your hand and it takes an abnormally long time to heal, that can be a symptom of EDS. Sometimes our scars heal weirdly too. So I have a very big one on my leg, and it just looks kind of funky. Like it's been several years, I think almost 10 years since I had that surgery, and it still hasn't fully healed. Like it's not white, like it's still discolored and it's kind of like jagged. And it shouldn't be that way, but that's just part of having, very flexible skin, very loose skin, very bad collagen, that kind of thing. So those are some of the major symptoms. Of course, along with that is a ton of chronic pain. There will always be chronic pain with EDS. Some doctors have compared EDS patients to having similar level of pain as cancer patients. So it can be very, very intense. For some people, that looks like, if they've just dislocated their shoulder, that's the only pain they feel. For some people, it's pain throughout their entire body all of the time. For some people, it's only pain after they've done some kind of exertion. So if they've tried to exercise in a way they don't normally do, that's what I experience a lot. If I try a new method of weightlifting or a new type of physical activity, I'll typically be in a lot of pain the next day, maybe the next couple of days, until I get used to that, until I build up my muscles to get used to that. For some people, if they sit in one position for too long, it can be very painful. If they move around too much, it can be painful. So again, it's very varied, and it does depend on which type of EDS you have. Again, there's 13 types. So it really is individualized, and that's part of why it's so hard to diagnose, is because there's so many different symptoms that completely seem unrelated. So when I first, got sick, I was just having, like dizzy spells and passing out and some fatigue, and that was it. And then stuff started showing up like after a couple months, just random things showing up. And doctors didn't think it was connected because I was going to all these different specialists, and they had no clue that my headaches would be connected to me being able to turn my leg around backwards. Like, who would think of that? So it is very difficult to get diagnosed with it because there's so many different symptoms. The only way to actually get diagnosed with EDS is to go to a geneticist. That generally takes several months after your referral. So I got a referral to a geneticist, and I had to wait about 6 months to see him. And then he diagnosed me very quickly. He took measurements of like my head and some weird things like that. Then he did the Baton scale on me, which is a very popular way of checking for EDS. That's actually something you can do at home if you think you might have EDS. You can look up the Baton scale. I think it's on the EDS Society, and they have a lot of different diagnostic criteria. I'll link that in the show notes. That's some of the tests he ran, and then he asked about my family history and all that kind of stuff. And we'll dive a bit more deeply into getting diagnosed with EDS in a later episode. But it is a very long process. It is a very difficult process. It's not always guaranteed. You might have all the symptoms of EDS, but then not actually get diagnosed with EDS. Because again, these symptoms can be very similar to other disorders. And so it's a very difficult process. And that's why there's so few people who have actually been diagnosed with EDS. There's a thought that EDS is actually very common, especially hypermobile EDS. That's actually the type that I have, where your joints are just very flexible, and that's the main symptom. But people think that there's actually a lot more people who have EDS, they just haven't been diagnosed. So for example, I was the first one in my family to get diagnosed with EDS, but it's a genetic disorder. So there's definitely, I got it from somewhere, right? And so my doctors think that my mom has it and that her entire side of the family has it. So, I mean, that's at least 8 people that we think have it, but I'm the only one that got diagnosed. So it may seem uncommon, but it's probably a lot more common than anyone thinks right now. And hopefully as we raise awareness for it through EDS Awareness Month, we'll be able to get more diagnosis and make it more common. The sad thing is there's no treatment for EDS. There's no magical pill or cure or anything that's going to take EDS away, because it is mainly, a muscular and joint problem. So there are a lot of different things you can do to manage EDS. Again, we'll be talking about that throughout this entire month, which I'm so excited about. There's a lot of different ways to manage it, so we'll be able to dive more deeply into that. But it is a very complex illness, and it is a chronic illness. It's an invisible illness, and so it takes a long time to get diagnosed, but it does really help to get a diagnosis, because then you can learn how to manage it. So if you're interested in learning more about EDS and doing some more of your own research, or if you think you might have it or a family member might have it, the 2 main websites I would recommend are the Zebra Network. They do amazing work. They were one of the first sites I turned to when I got diagnosed. And also the Ehlers-Danlos Society. They have a ton of research. They're the ones that I mentioned before that have all the diagnostic criteria listed out for all the different types. So they're absolutely amazing. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to message me, DM me on Instagram, email me, whatever. I'm always pretty quick to respond to that kind of stuff, especially during EDS Awareness Month. So please feel free to message me or comment down below. But there's a lot more to be learned about EDS. Even though I've had it for 8 years now, I'm still learning about it. I'm still learning about what works for me. And I'm excited for this next month too, because I'm going to be talking to a lot of amazing people who, have a lot of wonderful information to share and will help me to learn as well. So I'm really excited. I hope you guys get to tune in for all of those. And if you know someone in your life who has EDS, talk to them about it. Most of us aren't going to be like awkward or offended if you ask us about what it's like having EDS. Like, you don't need to feel uncomfortable. If somebody says, I don't want to talk about that, then you probably shouldn't talk to them about it. But it is EDS Awareness Month, and I think it would mean a lot to them if you went up to them and asked about it and asked about what their experience with EDS is, because again, it does vary a lot from person to person. Hopefully you'll get to tune in for the rest of these episodes. Hopefully you'll be able to talk to people about EDS. I'll be sharing more resources on my website and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. You know where to find it all. And so I'm really excited. And stay tuned for the next month because it's going to be very exciting. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a rating or subscribe for future episodes. It's a small action, but it really does help to spread the word about invisible illnesses. Also, if you want to stay up to date on all things Unseen But Believed, go follow me over on Instagram and TikTok at Unseen But Believed. And remember, just because invisible illnesses are unseen, they should be believed.